So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Burgundy 2023 Fireside Chat. Most of you should know me. I'm Nathan Hill, one of the co-founders of Honest Grapes, and I'm joined by my amazing co-founder, Tom Harrow. Tom will wave at everybody from the sidelines, and Ruth Morell, who joined me for everything except for the first 2.5 days of nearly a fortnight I spent in Burgundy. Actually, I was also out in Burgundy in June, in the southern tip of the Côte d'Or in Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais. So there are a few little observations from there as well. Just to repeat for everybody who's joining us as I'm getting started, we are now recording this for posterity. It'll be going up on YouTube either later this evening or maybe sometime tomorrow. If you're shy and don't want to be seen on screen, then please switch your camera off. I suspect you'll only be seen if you, given the number of people, I suspect you'll only be seen if you pop up and ask a question. I'm going to do my very best to answer questions for everybody. And please try and wave. That will be coordinated by my wonderful colleague Beth, who's busy letting everybody in at the moment as well. So Burgundy is very much the heartland of Tom's and my ethos in terms of why we started Honest Grapes 10 years and 2 months ago in the first place. I've been a long-term collector. It's now coming up on 30 years. Although frankly, I was only really collecting En Primeur for the last 14, 15 years or so. And of course, everybody who knows Tom knows of his passion and enthusiasm for Burgundy, and been in the business ever since graduating from university, I think, Tom. Ruth came out with me to Burgundy this time, and great fun being with Ruth. I think we were out together. Well, I think I was out there for 12 days this time and 3 or 4 days in the summer. And so what you're going to be getting is the sum of us visiting over 30 domains and maisons that we work together with. So let's get started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 2023 as a growing season, and I'm going to talk very briefly about 2024. Obviously, the growing season that's just happened, and where the wines are currently just being vinified. I'll talk a bit about the quality and perception of wines, and I'll go through that village by village. I'm mainly going north to south, but I've put Chablis near the end because I didn't actually visit Chablis on either of my trips, although I've done quite a bit of tasting, so I'll be able to comment on them. Tastings in the UK, and tastings of producers who make Chablis but who are based in the Côte d'Or. I'll talk about how I see pricing at the moment, allocations. At the end, I'll talk about our club barrel syndicates, how to get involved in Burgundy 23, and answer as many Q&A as possible. Please feel free to interrupt, but maybe a bit later on. Let me try and get started with the talk bit first, and then we'll jump in. I'll stop sharing the screen, be able to answer as many questions as possible. So 2023, it's a year of abundance. I think we've all heard this. The yields were well above the 10-year average, but it wasn't a year of although the temperature was very high during the year on average, there weren't the big heat spikes of 2018 or 2020. There was a bit of hail in the Côte de Nuits in June, a couple of hailstorms, but there were no severe heat spikes, and there was just enough rain through the season such that there was not too much hydric stress on the vines. That's the stress that vines experience when they don't have enough water, and they can sometimes shut down or go dumb. But it was warm, and there was a little hydric stress. And I'm talking about the whole of a large area as though it was one place. There are some areas, particularly higher hills or sites exposed to more sun, where the skins of the grapes got thicker, and there was a bit of hydric stress. But the key thing for you to know is that it was most of the producers we spoke with spoke about the generosity of the growing season, the lack of disease pressure, which meant they could just get on with things, and actually finding too many bunches on each vine meant that they had a lot of decisions to make in the vineyard. But before we get to that, what happened at the harvest, in broad terms, although it was nice and moderate and warm temperatures through the growing season, just as it got to harvest, there was a sharp increase in temperature in the last week of August, first week of September, which meant that people had to choose quickly whether they harvested before the rain hit or after. The rain hit depending on where you were in the first week of September. And so the decisions that people made in the vineyards on green harvest, picking dates, crop yields, and whether or how much whole cluster to use, whole bunches in red wine making, were very important decisions. And because the vines were so productive, many people told me that whereas they'd normally look for 4 or 6 or 7 bunches of grapes per vine, they were getting 10, and they had to do a green harvest, which means cutting bunches off at a very early stage, just past flowering generally. And they did that so that the vines would concentrate their productivity on a smaller number of bunches. But of course, that meant there would also be, given the low harvests in previous years up to 2021, 22 was sort of on average or a little bit above average. There was obviously the tendency for some people to get greedy and allow more crop, which would mean perhaps dilution and lack of acidity. So the decisions people made at harvest were really important. And the more they got it right, actually, in the vineyard, the easier it was for them in the winemaking. You'll see the picture I saw when I was driving through Rully of a Vinopole experimental climate change planting site in Rully, and I passed several of these during the drives that Ruth and I made around the vineyards. So here are some overall impressions of 2023, and accompanied by the lovely Marie from Paul and Marie Jackson in Rue, one of my first visits on the Monday I arrived. It's a very good year for whites, perhaps very, very floral, perhaps not the highest acidity or the highest tension or nervosity that we've had in a couple of other years, but it's a lovely year where there's a lot of precision in the whites, in their aromas, in their tastes, in their complexity. It's definitely a year of red and blue fruits with a lovely texture in the Côte de Beaune. And in the Côte de Nuits, whereas in more recent years, we've had a lot of black fruit and dark red cherries and dusty petals and potpourri smells, here we had a lot more generosity of red and morello cherries, flowers and silky tannins. There's a lot of tannic grip in the wines that will make them more difficult to taste actually when you come to our Primeur tastings. You'll get much more grip than you had in recent years, but they're just showing that way. A massive difference that Ruth and I picked up, that older vines are showing darker fruit and tannic structure. And I think a real bifurcation here, that particularly in Côte de Nuits, that the red and morello cherry notes and the big generous flowers and fruits were showing on the younger and normal age vines, and some of those really old gnarly vines, or the ones with some hydric stress or on high hills, were showing much darker fruit and much bigger, grippier tannic structure. That's something to look out for when you're putting wines into your collection this year. It's not a bad thing, it's just a variation in character. In general, I'm going to focus more, as usual, of course, on the Côte d'Or, but all of Chablis, Châlons, Mâcon, and Beaujolais, I'll include Beaujolais as honorary Burgundy in this context, have all been very, very good indeed. So, whereas 2022, you could barely go wrong. You could sort of choose anything, and it would be more, what could you afford? What style did you like? In 2023, it's a slightly more classic year. The alcohol levels are a little bit lower. Again, it's a solar year without being solar. So alcohol levels were typically up to about 13.8%. I don't think I saw anything, I can't remember anything, Ruth, beyond 14. Much more brighter fruit, more on the red and blue side with some on the black side. And a year where you really just want to focus, that terroir specificity was really shining through. We have pruned out, and we will rigorously take out of the offer as we make it, the odd wine where people went a bit heavy on their cropping. We asked everybody what the maximum permitted cropping in their commune was, in their village, commune, or lieu-dit, and what they achieved. In some cases, I think people were, naturally, they've had some hard years. They might have been a bit too greedy to fill that cellar with more wine. And that would have led to a bit lower acidity and maybe dilution. We saw very, very few examples of that, but those won't be making their way into our offer. The overall acidity was pretty much the same as 2022, so not exceptional for acidity. And Tom and I are acid lovers. We like raciness, we like tension in wines. It's not a top year for acidity, but the perception of acidity is very good. So it's a good one. The wines are a moving target and evolving significantly in barrel and in tank. We've noted every sample, whether it was barrel, tank, or bottle samples. Because I was out there myself in June as well, I could taste significant differences between my tastings in June and in November. And I do think they'll continue to evolve more faster more radically before they hit the bottle. So it's a very interesting year in that sense. Now look at this slide. This is in the cellar of Domaine de l'Ombre in Moray-Saint-Denis. And on the left-hand side, you can see the barrels of the 2023 cellar. And on the right-hand side, you can see the barrels of the 2024 cellar. In 2023, production at Domaine de l'Ombre was 40% above the 10-year average. Every space is full to 2 barrels high. In 2024, production was at 30% below the 10-year average, and everything is down to 1 level and the cellar isn't full. But I think it's, before you get carried away about 2024, I'm just going to make one slide of observations, and many of you have participated in our very successful crowd-funded syndicates for 3 barrels at the Hospice de Beaune of 2024, where the quality was brilliant. Firstly, don't confuse quantity and quality. There's undoubtedly low and mixed volumes, but actually some people, for example, Charles Magnan in Domaine Henri Magnan, his production was down by 30% from his 10-year average. Other people, like Domaine de Comte Armand, were very much more hit and were down to 20% of the production of 2023, or only about 40% of the running average. So many people said that 2023 wines were more approachable than 2022 because they didn't have that solar bigness to them, and they show a freshness, vivacity, somewhat lower alcohol level. In 2024, though, we'll get lighter wines. Oh, well, that's a misspelling, not like 2107. We're not quite up to that yet. But wines perhaps a bit more like 2017 and 21, with more brighter red fruit, lovely perfumes, lower alcohol. But the people who have done well in 2024 are the ones who did very hard work in the vineyards to take all their good grapes and bring them in. The Hospice wines, and we took a group of club members out to for the weekend to Burgundy, and several of you tasted those. The Hospice wines were absolutely brilliant. So please don't make up your mind about 2024 yet. With better winemaking, good technology, and careful harvesting, I think we should reserve judgments and don't confuse quantity and quality. Talk a little bit about what it's like to go to Burgundy in November. Well, actually, first thing is that there are major engineering works on the TGV between Paris, Gare de Lyon, and Dijon. And so I had to go to a place I've never been to before called Le Creusot, which is on the TGV line that goes down to Lyon rather than the normal one we go on that goes out to Dijon. And you end up in this little, a TGV stop in the middle of nowhere. It's actually quicker to get to from Paris than the one that goes out to Dijon. And you drive along a country road by a canal, and really conveniently, you're only about half an hour from Mercurey and Rully. And so that's why I started. And you can see here, as I'm in the Mercurey, coming into Rully and Mercurey areas, you're in farmland that isn't monoculture. A lot of it isn't vines. And it was misty. And you see lots of little tractors and white vans with labourers in the vineyard. And it was cold and misty. Last year in November 2023, when Tom and I were out in Burgundy, it was warm and wet, and you could almost feel the vines rotting. It was a really bad setup for the year. This year was a really good setup. It was cold and misty. In fact, I think I've seen Instagrams in the last couple of days of snow in Burgundy. That's really good. The vineyard workers have had time to prune. They were burning dead leaves, pruning everything down, making it ready for the winter. And now some snow and eventually some frost will shut down the vines, ready for a brilliant, a fabulous 2025 vintage, so we hope. It was so misty, and I think it was the second evening, Ruth, before you arrived, I was down in Sontenay in Poligny-Montrachet, and the sat-nav guided me through 7 kilometers of vineyard tracks. And you're driving in the dark on muddy vineyard tracks with ditches both sides, trying to avoid the little tractors and white vans at 6 o'clock in the evening when it's already dark. I don't know if this slide at the Chambertin actually conveys it, but it can be quite murky. The fog settles down, can lift up again in the afternoon and then settle down at the night. It's really murky, quite hard to get good photos, but a lovely time of year there. Let's start, I'm going to canter through the villages now, going from north to south, except I'll put Chablis at the end because I didn't get to Chablis on my 2 trips, but we've done quite a few tastings, so I'll comment. So visited over 30 domains and maisons. I've put our principal relationships on each slide, but I'll give a couple of comments, and then please, if you've got questions, yell, and I'll speak more later, answer questions about individual producers later. This is Pierre du Rocher of Domaine du Rocher, wearing a wonderful hoodie, which says Gevrey-Chambertin, Route des Grands Crus. I don't know if you can see it. Always a stellar tasting. What was really notable about his wines this year was the generosity of them. His style has become so austere and not muted, but one that's so pensive, and that you're sitting there waiting, God, that's going to take time to come around. This year, all of the wines were showing bright red and cherry fruit with deep juice and lovely tannic grip all the way through. Henri Magnan, I think, was one of the first tastings you joined me in, Ruth. No, maybe on the second day, I think. After we'd done 3 big maisons, we did Albert Bichot, we did the maisons and domain of our friends at de Monty, and we also did Bichot on that day as well. God, that was a heavy day. And then we drove back up to Gevrey-Chambertin to see Charles Magnan at Domaine Henri Magnan. Absolutely stellar tasting with him this year. His wines were just showing that Gevrey-Chambertin is just showing beautiful fruit this year. None of those, very rarely did we see those sort of dusty potpourri or rose petals that we've seen for the last 3 years. Much more generous and big and voluminous fruit. Similarly, at Drouin-la-Rose, in fact, the Chambertin Clos de Bez there is from our tasting at Drouin-la-Rose. Again, very different style of winemaking at Drouin-la-Rose, but very big, generous fruit, very voluptuous this year. Really, really exciting. Probably with Drouin-la-Rose being on the darker side of the fruit, and Du Rocher and Henri Magnan being on the cherry and redder side of fruit. Now to Morin-Saint-Denis, Romain Topinot shown there with the red sweatshirt, and Jacques Devage from Domaine de l'Ombre, in his big new LVMH cellars and his big new wonderful winery that they're built for him. But we tasted at Topinot with Romain, Domaine de l'Ombre, and with Frédéric Magnan right at the end. De l'Ombre was showing, again, really beautiful, silky soya, sort of silky tannins, beautiful, voluptuous fruit. His new cuvées, which has got Vosne Romanée and Nuits Saint-Georges in there, and I think a Chambolle Musigny, if I remember correctly, all just wonderful. With Romain Topinot, I tasted with him at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, if I remember correctly. Romain's wines, for me, at village level, his wines are always the absolute reference for the year they're in. And so they were this year. I could go from his wines and benchmark his village wines and his Premier Crus. Tom, you'll love his Moët Saint-Denis La Riotte again this year. Absolute reference in Moët Saint-Denis. And it is Bas de Combe, isn't it, as well? And his Nuits Saint-Georges Prullier. All of those at Premier Cru level, absolutely behaving like references. I think it's important to say at this point that we don't have prices from many people yet, but the prices we've seen are very much the same as last year, with some small ups and downs, maybe a bit of currency correction and things like that. I think people are worried about the volumes they'll have next year. So rather than reducing prices, which I think we all hoped would happen before seeing how low volume the harvest of 24 was, I think generally people are holding their prices the same so far from the lists I've seen, and probably holding some wine back to re-release next year. The other big thing I'd like to highlight, not specifically with Moët Saint-Denis and Gevrey-Chambertin, this is a picture of Frédéric Magnon's cellar on the outskirts of Moët Saint-Denis. A lot more use of amphora, eggs, glass, sort of massive test tube things, and also puncheons and 500 and 600 litre barrels. The production of whites has moved very strongly now to 500 and 600 litre neutral or older oak barrels, with much less use of 228 litre barrels. The use of eggs, Du Rocher, for the first time, has made 5 of his cuvées, partly in concrete eggs or terracotta. I think they were concrete eggs in his case. So a lot of use now, whereas people were hiding these in the background, people are now much more using them in the foreground. In Frédéric Magnon's wines, I think, Ruth, that was the most stunning tasting right at the end of our trip before we returned to Paris. He's really a star in the making, not related, I'm told, to Charles Magnon of Domaine Henri Magnon. These are organic, biodynamic wines. They're beautifully floral. They're absolutely stunning in their florality, their food friendliness, slightly different acid balance in them as well. They're just gorgeous. Moving on to Chambolle-Musigny, I'm delighted to have recovered our Roumier allocations. And Ruth and I spent a very happy morning with Christophe Roumier in Chambolle-Musigny, but also with perhaps the less famous but glorious wines of the most modest couple that you'd ever imagine, Anne and Hervé Sigaud. And I've got to remind people of a story from when Tom and I first met Anne and Hervé Sigaud. We actually turned up late on a Friday evening. My phone was dead, so I was unable to take photos or write notes. We'd just sort of run out by then. And they were sort of sitting watching TV with sort of tea trays on their laps. And we turned up and they went downstairs and got these little blue, which you saw this time, Ruth, these little blue carriers, like milk bottle carriers, with little bottles of wine, and shared them with us. They're the most modest couple, but they've got 7 Premier Crus in Chambolle-Musigny, making absolutely stunning wines. Why am I showing them together? Well, firstly, you've got, one of the most famous winemakers in Burgundy, in the same village as somebody who's got very old vines dating back centuries, but more modest in terms of how well they're known. The vines that Anne and Hervé Sigaud are making their wine from are tens of years old, but the wines that Christophe Roumier is making his wines from are much nearer to 80 to 100 years plus old. And the difference in taste was so astonishing between these two. But their style of winemaking is not all that different. But Christophe Roumier is getting a much denser, tauter, tightly wound type of Chambolle-Musigny out of his grapes. Whereas Anne and Hervé Sigaud, Chambolle-Musigny is sort of typically sort of blackcurrant juice and silky soya tannins with sort of grit for the middle term, sort of silky tannins there. But Anne and Hervé Sigaud are getting much more of that typical nature, whereas Christophe Roumier is getting wines which are much bigger and bolder and will take a lot longer to come round. It's a lovely contrast between two tastings in the same village. Moving on to one of my great places, you see what's going on here with generational change here. Here on the left-hand side, we've got the lanky, gorgeous, amazing man, Pierre Gros, of Domaine Michel Gros, an absolute superstar. Tom and I were skeptical in 2021. We weren't quite sure of the tasting. But in 22, we went back and we comparatively tasted all of his 22s against his 21s, and we were bowled over. And his 2023s are another advance on that yet. Right in the heart of the village of Vanromene, seen in a sense as the third of the grows after Anne and AF grow. I think now he's got hold of that Richebourg, the Echezeaux, the Vougeot that was transferred within the family, plus his famous Clos de Réa, the only monopole Premier Cru Vanromene. His wines, he really is a great superstar. We're really backing him heavily, really one to look out for. And then next to him is the father Patrice and son Charles Cachot. So that's the grandson, as it were, of the original Jacques Cachot, who founded this Vanromene producer. Again, you see a generational change really happening in Burgundy at the moment. And Ruth, your French is much better than mine, but I could tell all the dirty jokes that Patrice was telling our colleagues. He's just a barrel of laughs. And Charles is the guy who's making just beautiful Vanromenes, and he's actually got some really good plots there. So a big suggestion for everybody in 2023 is look careful. Don't just look for the famous names. Look for people who've got old vines, young winemakers. It's always been a Tom and me theme, and I think a great one to follow this year. There's lots of superstardom coming from this next generation. Moving into the village of Nuits Saint-Georges, there's far too much to talk about here, but I'll just highlight, I think, a stellar year for Maison Edouard de Launay. And this is Jan, 22 years old or something, Ruth? I can't remember. The young lady.
Sorry, she's 26.
26, okay. But she's now running the Languedoc production for Maison Edouard de Launay. Here she's standing next to our barrels of Hospice de Nuits Saint-Georges Le Didier, Cuvée Farran, that we bought in the 2023 vintage in March 24 this year. In the other picture, you can see Domaine de Larlo, part of the Clos. This is not the Clos de Forêt Saint-Georges. It's part of the other vineyard that runs down. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but the vineyard that runs down from the Clos de Forêt down towards the main road. There's a lot of stunning wine going on. I think Nuits Saint-Georges, particularly at Premier Cru level, really hit its stride in 2019, and very, very nicely coincided with when Tom and I decided to start bidding at the Hospice de Nuits Saint-Georges. I think Delaunay's got better and better. One criticism I had of Delaunay in the past was quite heavy use of new oak. I'm much more convinced now, actually, that both Christophe Briotet, the former winemaker, and now Capucine, the new winemaker, are actually making a style of wine that really moderates that new oak after 3 or 4 years. We had dinner to the 1243 Club with our visitors who joined us for the weekend, of wines just dating back to 2019 and 20. The Chassagne Montrachet, Ruth, was glorious. The Nuits Saint-Georges, stunning. They're really, really doing well. And the tasting of their 23s, I really, really think Capucine has hit her stride in the new winemaking there. The tasting similarly at Domaine de Larlo, absolutely stunning wines this year. I don't think we'll have many bottles of Romanée Saint-Vivant, but I'll be maybe squirreling that away for myself. But certainly the Clos de Forêt Saint-Georges and the white. I just love the Nuits Saint-Georges white. It's just gorgeous. The Hill of Corton is somewhere where in the past I personally haven't collected wines from Corton, but I think climate change has really favoured this area in the sense that in the past I'd have seen the wines as being sort of dense black fruit, rather brackish, jagged tannins. They're much riper and more pleasant now. In fact, we have a lot of wines from the Hill of Corton now. Our main domain, actually, on the side of the Hill of Corton is Domaine Rapet in Corton and Beaujolais, managed by Vincent and his son Robin. Actually, this picture is from last year because Robin was sunning himself in, trying to remember where, Australia or somewhere. He was well away anyway. So
I think he was in New Zealand.
He was in New Zealand. Oh, well, there you are. Okay. So so this picture actually is a slight cheat because this is one I took in November 23, but our tasting was hosted by Vincent. The wines at Rapet were really, really good this year as well. again showing a lot of terroir specificity. His whites, the Corton and Beaujolais Premier Cru Souffletti, always one of my favorites, had a lot more floral nature and a lot more sort of chalky backbone than the last couple of years, which have sort of been more voluptuous and more punchy. His Corton Charlemagne, and I noticed this with de Monty and others as well, the Corton Charlemagne this year is exceptionally fine and filigreed in structure rather than being solar and bold. I've put a number of other producers here, de Monty, Jane Eyre, Pustol, Philippe Paquelet. Well, the reason for that is that everybody's making a Corton now, okay? And I think it's a style thing. My guidance for you when you come to buying Corton is ask somebody who's tasted them to something that fits your style, because they go all the way from very red fruit, very generous fruit, to the more traditional black and blue fruit style, but without so many sort of rasping, jagged tannins that you used to get. I think also our CGRS has benefited at the somewhat sort of lower level in terms of price from being less hot. I'd say the same also from Saint-Romain and Montelly, which I won't really cover in this talk. I think the fact that it's a solar year without being solar means that the wines haven't hit the high alcohol levels and sort of overall punchiness of 2020 and 2022. Beaune would be far too big a subject to cover within the scope of this session. I'll just say we tasted a lot of wines in the big maisons and wines from Beaune. So in this, I'll mention the maisons a bit and then talk about the Premier Crus of Beaune. We tasted a huge variety of wines from Albert Bichot and their domains, Domaine de Coeffrantin, Château-Gris, Domaine Long d'Eparquis in Chablis, Domaine de Pavillon in Pommard. I must have missed one or two out there because they have 6 domains. Philippe Paquelet is based in Beaune, has a huge variety of wines. Bouchard, Père et Fille, and Olivier Bernstein. For the Beaune appellation, though, I'd say careful a little bit on that dilution and overcropping bit. A couple of people, I think, were a bit overambitious in their wines. We've done the filtering out already. Nothing that we offer will have too much dilution there. But I think these are quite big climats, and so I think there's necessary in Beaune just to have a little bit of careful selection of which wines you buy from the appellation. Having said that, some of Tom's and my favourites, the Beaune Grève from Delaunay, from de Monty, were absolutely gorgeous with those broad shoulders, but not being as punchy as in the big solar years of 20 and 22. And on the white side, the Beaune Premier Cru Clos des Mouches is absolutely gorgeous, again from Domaine de Pavillon. So yeah, looking pretty good there. Just when you do your tastings, just look out for yourself in terms of acidity and dilution. We will have taken those out. Moving to around Beaune, this is a bit of a catch-all here because of course we have Jane Eyre, who's now she's now technically based in Cissy-les-Beaunes, but her wines, I've put her in here because of her famous Savigny-les-Beaunes, but obviously she's also well known for her Beaujolais and for Gevrey-Chambertin and Gevrey-Chambertin Premier Cru Corbeau, Domaine Tollebeau in Choy-les-Beaunes, and Pierre Murgy at the Chateau de Bligny. Again, this year has very much favoured them. The tannic structure is fine and ripe and generous, with a lot of fruit on top of them. So the nature of the wines is beautifully terroir specific. If you want to contrast with 2020 and 22, where they were more solar, the solar years tend to produce higher alcohol, more generosity of taste, but also flattens out the terroir specificity a bit. In this case, you could really tell what was a Choy-les-Beaunes, what was an Alcidières, and what was a Savigny-les-Beaunes. You could more or less get them in a blind tasting. Also, 2023 saw less new oak overall. That's partly for a technical reason, that people had to buy lots of new oak in 2022 because of the low production in 2021. So their 2023s naturally saw less new oak. But generally, it sort of fitted the vintage better. Also, there was less whole bunch fermentation. Paquelet, of course, everything was whole bunch. On the complete other side, in Vosne, Guillaume Tardy was ever so proud of his fancy new destemming machine, where absolutely every little grape is shaken off and coddled and never doesn't see a stem. But some people down in Pommard, like our lovely friends at Domaine Domaine Comte Armand, they just didn't have space in the vats for the stalks. So actually, it was partly a decision made for them. They were full to overflowing, didn't have space for the stalks. So therefore, their wine had less whole bunch. Oh, here we are in Comte Armand. This is the new winemaker in Domaine Comte Armand. But we have a lot of production in Pommard. But I'd say the big three are de Monty, Domaine de la Pousse d'Or, and Domaine Clos de la Chapelle, which have got beautiful holdings between Pommard and Volnay, and Meursault and Co. Lovely tasting at Clos Epinot, beautiful Pommards at de Monty. This really was a good Pommard year. Going on to Volnay, here's Pierre Murgy. Pierre Murgy we're involved with 3 times over. He has his négoce operation in Chateau de Bligny, which is the Pierre Murgy wines. Those were a really lovely tasting this year. I'd say last year, 22, his wines were bigger and somewhat sort of more structured and quite hard to approach and will take longer to mature. 2023, his wines were more deft of touch, more voluptuous, more fruity. Really a very, very good year for him. The Murgy Creuse wines, which were made down in Mâcon, were racy, beautiful. I think Mâcon's had a very good year. And then Domaine Clos de la Chapelle, which we started to represent for the first time in 2022, has had a stunning year with these amazing holdings, which are almost contiguous with de Monty, Dujac, and Domaine de la Pousse d'Or. Very interesting that those 4 wineries, so those 4 winemakers, have holdings almost next to one another. The picture here is the Clos de la Chapelle in Volnay. Now down to Meursault and Saint-Aubin. Our drum playing, or actually it turns out it's his son drum playing, Charles Ballot of Ballot-Mio, gave a stunning demonstration of his Meursault wines, but also so did Bourgoulot and de Monty. It's a very, very good year for Meursault. If you want the highest nervosity, then you might feel 23, you might just want to be careful. Wait until you see our tasting notes and those of reviewers, because this is a year that had a bit less nervosity in Meursault and a bit more of that sort of terroir, that lovely terroir-specific approach. Without the acid is good. Don't let me make you think it's going to be terrible, but it's not the year for that racy nervosity of 21s if you could get any, or 20 or 22. But the wines were great. Very interesting. I had a big conversation actually about the scores that different reviewers were giving him last year, and how his Geneviève, Perrier, and Charme all related to one another this year. Very, very interesting tasting with him this year. Very, very high degree of terroir specificity in Meursault. One of my favorite appellations nowadays. Chassagne we tasted with the amazing Philippe Collin. Of course, the de Monty wines, the Chalumeau and the Cailleret. Sorry, that's Pouligny. In Chassagne we tasted those de Monty, Philippe Collin and Fontaine-Ganard. And Céline Fontaine gave her usual tour de force of, I can't remember, with 8 different Premier Crus of Chassagne and some wonderful red. Do look out for those red Chassagne. They really are quite a treat. Actually at village level as well as Premier Cru level. So Céline was great fun, great value this year, as ever. Then on Pouligny-Montrachet, sorry, I'd skipped myself. The usual tasting with Chavy, that was amazing, seeing the variety of wines he's making, and actually a very good year for him. The de Monty wines, again, in this case, I'd said them before, the Chalumeau and the Cailleret. Again, Pouligny-Montrachet, for me, had sort of sunk back a bit over the years, but it's coming forward. I haven't put in this in this note, but actually also at Domaine de la Pousse-d'Or, they just make one, the Pouligny Cairo, which I personally collect each year. We just get a few cases of. So Pouligny, again, good to look out for this year. In Santenay, our lovely new friend Benoit Girardin, we're hoping, he just had a baby, I think it was a baby girl, Ruth, just before Tom and I visited last year. This year, the little girl is fine, and therefore we're hoping to get him over for one of the tastings in January, either the one at 67 Pall Mall or the Valley Villages of Burgundy event. His Santenay's food-friendly approach is the nephew of Vincent Girardin and son of Yves Girardin. The wines are great. We've also got a number of Negociant wines from Jane Eyre, Delaunay, Domaine de la Pousse-d'Or, also in Santenay. Really want to look out for and offering good value and comparison with the wines just next door in the Montrachet's and then up into Meursault. In Nuits and Mercurey, as I said before, I was able to start by making my colleague Red very jealous by spending an afternoon at Domaine François Raquier and at Paul-Marie Jackson. It's again a good year in Nuits and Mercurey, and I'll skip to Macon. Again, we've had to be a little bit careful in all of these with just making sure we've been careful on everything where people have been a bit over aggressive in cropping. So it's one to look out for in your tastings. But we didn't find a lot of that. Most of the producers we work with are quite careful. Going back to Chablis that I didn't visit, I've tasted quite a bit across there. And I've missed out to Montes on this note. Do get Chablis 23 because there won't be any 2024. When I spoke about 24 earlier, Chablis really was messed up in 24. That just the constant rain and so on. I've had a question in the group chat from Claudia saying, do I ever try wine and think this is awful? Well, yes, I know I'm going to sound like I'm gushing, but of course we go through things and I have a very rigorous star system. A star for something I like, 2 stars for something we need to have, 3 stars for something that's epic. I don't give that to many. And then a discreet little down sign because I'm usually sitting next to the winemaker who's very keen to show us how great all their wines are. And I just go, no, that's not finding a place this time. And obviously, Tom and I will battle that out. And Tom has the final decision on what goes into the offer.
But Nathan, I just answer Claudia a little bit by saying definitely not in 2023. We did not taste any wines where we looked at each other and thought, God, this is awful. It was very rare.
Yeah, and I think I've already given the hint that whereas 2022, you could stick a pin in the map and everything was good. And it was more a matter of what areas you liked, what price you were prepared to pay. 23, we have to prune out a little bit of low acidity, a little bit of overcropping.
But we didn't really taste anything that was bad.
But, no, we are dealing with artisan producers, not bulk producers, and so they're not trying to squeeze the last drop out of each grape. In Beaujolais, I was there in the summer. Rather than on this trip, although we did taste some Beaujolais from people like Pacolet and Jane Eyre. Again, it's been a very good year. I think, we've had Beaujolais in a very week. Let's not talk about that. Cru Beaujolais, I never used to buy myself, but I'm really warming to. I think Jane Eyre did a wonderful job this year in Fleury. Do buy, by the way, we've got some good stocks of her 2021s and 22s. Do buy those as well. Pacolet's Moulin à Vent was stunning as ever. Domaine de Rochegray from the Bichot stable, and this one I'm showing Alain Coudert down in Fleury. If you look at the picture carefully, he's now got holdings in Bruy, Fleury, and Moulin à Vent. These are really good. It's very down to earth style of Beaujolais, really good. Going to finish saying just a little bit about the Hospice Syndicate tour. We took a group of guests out. This picture's stretched a little bit, but this is the Pièce de Président with the amazing winemaker and Ludivine Greveux, myself, Ruth, and the team. So you can see some of the old barrels that we nearly grabbed hold of, but we actually did have a 1959 Hospice de Nuit Saint-Georges Premier Cru at the dinner at the 1243 Club on the Friday evening. And this is our lovely group in the outdoor market in Beaune on the Saturday. Do come and join us if you want to get under the skin of Burgundy. These tours really are a way of feeling part of it. And this group of people helped us to taste the Syndicate 24s. So we bought 3 barrels last weekend. It was really, really scary, but we bought a barrel of Corton Grand Cru, which is Corton Bresson, Charlotte Dumas cuvée. We bought a barrel of trying to remember now, Volnay. The Volnay is brilliantly dense and crunchy. Everything you hear about 24s being rubbish, all the Volnays are absolutely stunning, dense, crunchy, gorgeous wines. A lovely barrel of Volnay Centenot, that bit of Volnay that's actually just over the border in Meursault. The Volnay Centenot is stunning, and a barrel of Meursault Premier Cru Gevrey-Chambertin. I got my own back on Tom. Tom always wants charm. I'm a Gevrey-Chambertin girl. So we managed to get Gevrey-Chambertin this time. I'm told by the team we still have 12 bottles of Gevrey-Chambertin, Meursault Gevrey-Chambertin, if somebody wants it. The other 2 barrels are completely full. In terms of upcoming club syndicates, some of you will already know with the team who came out to us last weekend, we tasted, sorry, it's the weekend before last now. We've selected a wonderful barrel for the club of Pommard, Paquelé Pommard Premier Cru Epinot 2023. A few of those shares have already gone. If you're interested, please ask your wine guru, Ruth, James, Tom, myself, somebody from the team to reserve you a share. It is a tête de cuvée like the Vosne Romanée this year. We are expecting to have 2 barrels of Delaunay Bourgogne Aligoté 23, modestly priced. It's been very successful for us. Wonderfully, achingly fashionable vineyard, single vineyard. The wine of Professor Fouillat, I think, the enologist teacher of Laurent Delaunay, from the little vineyard that's just across the road and over the hill from the Château de Chaumont, where Delaunay is based. And of course, next March, we hope to be bidding at the Hospice de Nuits Saint-Georges for the 24 vintage of March 2025. Timetable is very simple. Oh, here's a picture of the Vosne Romanée Le Beaumont 23 in a François Frère barrel. This again from Jacques Devage of the Domaine de l'Ombre. The Pommard Syndicate for Paquelé is now open. As I said, a number of the shares of that have already gone. Please yell if you'd like to join in that syndicate. We expect to make a few releases in December. I don't know exactly yet, but I'd hope we do a bit of Chablis, a bit of Macon wine. Last year we did Jane Eyre and de Monty a bit before Christmas. We might do the same. But I'm rather old-fashioned in this. I like to have the main offer ready in time for our big portfolio tasting on the 14th of January. So we will have everything going up on the website and the brochure ready by the 14th of January. The Burgundy events today is the Fireside Chat. We'll have the En Primeur event at 67 Pall Mall on the 14th of January. It's already pretty heavily subscribed. So if you want to come to that, I think already more than half the tickets have gone, Beth. So if you want to join that, go to our events page online. The Value Villages of Burgundy, that's a provisional date, the 23rd of January. We'll announce the final date shortly, but that's more the guided tutorial one that I'll host. For those of you joining us from Discord, I'll be hosting lunches in my home in Hampstead on the 18th and 19th of January, and I, together with others in the team, will be having dinners in London and Cambridge and elsewhere. I'm going to stop sharing at that stage. Has that worked? Can everybody see me properly now? And ask Ruth and Tom to join and try and answer as many questions as possible. I couldn't see the chats before. I now can. So if anybody wants to ask questions, please do.
Nathan, there is a question on there from John. Can you see it?
Now I can't see them again.
Okay, so John is asking, he's sipping a 2017 Lafarge Vol and tonight and loving it. Does 2023 potential compare with the early 2017 opinion and our opinions?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So as anybody who knows me will know that I see myself more as a classic Burgundian, in that the solar vintages amuse me and interest me, but the redder vintages excite me more. And 2023 is an unusual vintage in that it's a solar year, but the wines aren't solar. It's redder fruit and somewhat low alcohol. Not low alcohol, but as I said, I don't think I saw anything above 13.8%. 2017, anybody who remembers that vintage might remember that it wasn't all that successful commercially, because after the big fleshy tannins of 15 and the hail affected but otherwise big concentrated year of 2016, people were going, oh, that's a bit too aromatic and light. But actually 17s are hugely in vogue now, have filled out beautifully in the middle, and are actually drunk through. I mean, when we were in Burgundy, we were basically being served 22s, 22 Vin Romanée Premier Crus. It was amazing. So I'd say, what would you compare 23 with? We asked everybody that, and you'll see we've uploaded already. If you go to our YouTube channel, we've uploaded 10 short video clips, each of them about 1 or 2 minutes long, from producers saying what they think of the 23s. We always ask people, what vintage would you compare it with? And they're really struggling. They're saying things like, it's got the charm and approachability and floral nature of 17, but with the tannin structure and robustness of 19. But other people said different things. It's a very different vintage. I've been collecting for a long, long time now, and I don't remember a vintage like it. In a good way, I think for me, that's what makes Burgundy, is it being different each time.
It's not a homogeneous vintage. Everybody had a different. I mean, we did hear a few 2017 comparisons.
Yeah, and 19s, and I think 19 is a year that's got better and better. Similarly, by the way, again, those lighter years, 21s that we've been back and retasted, and I mentioned Tom and I retasting the Michel Gros wines last year. Every 21 I've opened has filled out as well. I think it's just that there's much better technical winemaking now, and even in a year that other people don't see as being a top hot year, people are managing to make great wines out of them. I'm trying to see the question pane, but if people can interrupt and ask lots, that's super. Oh, Tom is saying, and 2007. Oh, I might have not heard that. Questions, team? Type them in the chat or just unmute yourself and yell.
In the meantime, it's John again. Can I ask a question to the whites? Have you noticed a tendency for more differentiation now between Meursault, Chassagne, and Pouligny? Because we did go through a phase when they were all starting to make wines that tasted like sort of Pouligny wannabes.
Yeah.
Is the pendulum moving back so that you can actually enjoy what Meursault and Chassagne offers different to Pouligny?
Yeah, that's very fair, very, very good question, John. Thank you. Back in the day when I started collecting Burgundy, I've always been a big fan of Burgundy white, so I monitor it very carefully. It used to be that Pouligny was the top one, then Chassagne and Meursault was a long way behind. In the last 10 years, I'd say Meursault has accelerated radically with better winemaking, younger winemakers, and less brassy new oak there. Pouligny has lagged a bit, and Chassagne has stayed where it is or got better. So in my personal collection, I now have much more Meursault and Chassagne and less Pouligny. I think Pouligny has caught up a lot now, and again, it's about old vines, young winemakers, and less the way in which oak's being treated. I think the case for 23 is very specific, though, John, and that is that in 21 you had it was tiny production, but what was there was excellent, but very, very racy acidity, huge nervosity. In 2019, 2020, and 22, you've had different versions of heat, and the heat tends to flatten out the differences between those small changes in climat. 23 is nice because it's more floral, slightly lower alcohol and somewhat more gentle. And so the differences in specific climats and subclimats is very much sharper. So a demoiselle would taste different from a Caillavet, which would taste very different from the Montrachet just across the track from it. Whereas you couldn't say that every year. So I think 23 is a good year for that. But I do feel blessed, though. I mean, you'd have to go back to, what are the good white years? 9, 10, 14 is a big year for keeping. 17 is a wonderful, probably still needs some keeping. Then fortunately, we've had a run of good years. 1920, whatever 21 there was very good. 22 and now 23. So definitely for us white lovers, it's time to fill your cellars again. And with stable prices, I can't promise that across the board. I'm just saying from the price lists I've seen so far, we're seeing decent allocations and stable prices so far. But you will find it different, John. It's not the same. I can't compare. I'm thinking of my Pustor Puligny Cailleret 23, and I've got most vintages of that for the lot. I've been collecting that since 1996. I can't think of a year that's the same as the 23.